Okay, guys, I'm here to bring you what I consider a very exciting video, mainly because I get to talk about, the big guys, the defensive linemen, who I really just like to see play and who I like to see clash and display their talent. And so I'm really excited about what I have to bring you today. I'm going to be talking about the Florida State defensive lineman in this video, and this looks like it may just be a cursory video, like an initial look, because I feel like there's more here, but I just wanted to get this out so Alabama fans could be aware of the Florida State defensive line, and of course, you Florida State fans know what you have, but you can provide more insight, comment on the video, let me know what you think about things I have to say here, and just about some of these guys who I'm going to be mentioning. I bet Florida State defensive end and defensive tackle because they somehow separated the coach into two. The defensive ends coach Brad Lawing and defensive tackles coach Odell Haggins are going to be very, very happy with the work that they will be doing this year because they have a lot of bodies, which is always good for the defensive line and a lot of talent too. They've recruited really well. They probably had the best defensive line class of this past cycle here that brought in that are going to be freshmen this fall. They have Josh Kando, Trey Lawson, who are the defensive ends they brought in. And then, of course, they have the number one defensive tackle in the nation. I think he was the number one player in the nation, if I'm not mistaken. Marvin Wilson, also Corey Durden, and Jalen Parks. So they have a very good class coming in. Of course, I always say personally, you never know how freshmen are going to do. You never know if they're going to pan out. There's been plenty of five-star guys who didn't work out, but notwithstanding, that's why I don't like to predict how these recruits are going to do, which is why I don't get too excited. People always say, we got the best class. I'm like, yeah, you got the best class according to some subjective ranking by some evaluators, but you don't know how these guys pan out until they get on campus. With that said, I'm not saying that Florida State's class won't pan out, but I'm just saying that, temper the expectations. But from the first look at it, they got a very talented class. So, with that, I got to say this. All of Florida State's defensive linemen, with the exception of one, are 6'3" and taller. They're huge. They have long bodies and they're tall. It's rangy guys like Brian Burns and Josh Sweat and a few others. They even got a guy who's 6'6". I don't remember his name right now, but I'll get to it. These guys are huge. They're big, and the only guy who's not is Derek Noddy. I believe that's how you say his name. Some of you guys can correct me if you need to. And he's 6'1", 312 pounds, and he's playing defensive tackle, but he's going to be one of the more important parts on the Florida State defensive line this year. So that's a very good line. And also just in general, Florida State is returning 3 out of their 4 starters from the 2016 season on the defensive line. So the defensive line is going to be a very experienced group for Florida State. The D-line is probably going to be their most experienced group. Yeah, like I said, most experienced group on the defense and probably on the whole team, at least depth-wise. Let's talk about the guy who they lost from their starting lineup. They lost three guys in total from the line last year, but the most important one, of course, was DeMarcus Walker, who led the team in sacks last year, one of the better pass rushing ends in college football, and he was a second-round pick to the Broncos. Obviously, the Broncos do a good job evaluating that they would pick a guy. It shows you that he impressed them enough to be made their second-round pick. So that shows you the type of talent they had there. But they also lost Keith Bryan and they lost Justin Shanks, guys who played a bit last year, and they graduated as well. Now, let's talk about who they have returning. At defensive end, they didn't have as many guys returning at defensive end as they did at defensive tackle. So I'll tell you this. So within the fact that the defensive line is the most deep and experienced group that they have returning, the defensive tackles are the most experienced group out inside of the defensive line. They have a lot of guys, a lot of depth coming on the defensive tackle. But the defensive end, they've had about 4 guys who are returning, and of course the true freshmen. So not as many as defensive tackle, but still pretty good. They returned Brian Burns, who was a true freshman last year. He's 6'5", 218 pounds. He had 9.5 sacks as a true freshman last year, which was the most for a true freshman in the nation. Now, he's only 218 pounds, and I talked about this in the spring game. He's a slim guy, He's long in range. He's kind of like Terrell Hall for Alabama, although Terrell Hall's gotten much bigger. It'll be interesting to see where Brian Burns fits in with his weight for this upcoming season. But he does return, and if I know Florida State's scheme what I've been researching, he is a buck defensive end, and I don't know exactly what all that does. I'll have to do some more research when I watch one of their games or a couple games from last season, which I'll try to do before, of course. But he was a buck defensive end, meaning that he was a backup to Josh Sweat, who was the starting buck defensive end of last year. He was 6'4", 250 pounds, Josh Sweat, and he also was a talented guy who had, I think, 11 and a half tackles for loss last season, as well as 7 sacks. And he really turned it on toward the end of the season. In the last 3 games, he had 4.5 sacks. So he really got the most of his production, over 50% actually, in the last 3 games of the season. Also, at defensive end, they got returning some guys for backups. Jalen Wilkerson, who I think was the most direct backup to DeMarcus Walker. Florida State fans, you can let me know if that's true. And you also have Janarius Robinson, who I didn't hear as much about, but he does return. And like I said, at defensive end, who they got coming in for the freshman class is Kendo and Trey Lawson. So that's the defensive line group, defensive end group. Now for defensive tackles, a lot of guys coming back here. They have DeMarcus Christmas, Derek Nadi, Arthur Williams, Cedric Wood. I got time to talk about him. Frederick Jones, Adam Torres, Darvin Taylor, who's dealt with injury issues since coming to Florida State, so he's going to try to turn it around. And of course, the true freshmen, they got Marvin Wilson, #1 defensive tackle, Corey Durden, Jalen Parks. The starting defensive tackles, they're going to return from last year, Derek Nadi and DeMarcus Christmas. DeMarcus Christmas is 6'4", 308 pounds, is a huge defensive tackle. And Nadi is 6'1", 312, as I said before. Now, here's the thing about Nadi. He's always been a good run stopper for Florida State. But last year, he turned into a pretty good pass rusher from the defensive tackle spot as well. He had 10.5 tackles for loss, as well as 6 sacks. That's really good for a defensive tackle. Also, Christmas had 2.5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. So not as productive, but he probably did more of the holding up and keeping the guys steady and anchoring the line. So, and they're very good tackles returning. It's their second full season starting together, so they have more chemistry. They'll know what to expect out of each other. It's be really good. Their most direct backups will be Frederick Jones and Wabinski Aime, who both played a good bit last year. They both had some kind of standout games. I think Jones had a good game against the University of Central Florida, and Aime had a pretty good game, or Aime, however you say it, had a good game against Louisville where he had 5 tackles. They'll be the most direct backups to Nadi and Christmas. And also they have Taylor, like I said, who dealt with the injury, and Wood. I believe they will be the next to step up, at least in terms of being most experienced. You never know. Marvin Wilson will probably push for playing time. He's a talented guy, so he might jump ahead of them and maybe even get some reps from Jones and Aime. So we'll see what happens with them, with that situation, because you don't get to usually rotate all your defensive tackles into a game. So that's interesting. So that makes you think. So when I was talking about who the starting lineup will be, for sure it will probably be Josh Sweat, Nadi, and Christmas. Interesting thing is who will be the other starting defensive end. Some would automatically jump to Brian Burns, but as I said before earlier in the video, Brian Burns was also a buck defensive end in their scheme, meaning that he was the backup to Josh Sweat. So will they play both buck defensive ends at the same time? That is something that they have to determine, or will they let Jalen Wilkerson come in, or Kando with the true freshman, and start at the other defensive end spot and let Burns continue to come off the bench rotationally, kind of like Alabama did Tim Williams in his early years. It'll be interesting to see what they do there. They have options. Like I said, Burns had 9.5 sacks as a true freshman. Josh Sweat had 7 sacks, and he also had 11.5 tackles for loss. And then that's not even mentioning Jacob Pugh, who's really more, he's a hybrid linebacker, so he plays linebacker, but they let him play as a rusher last year. So he got on the field and he rushed the quarterback, and he had 4 sacks last year. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him. So they have these questions. I have these questions at least, and we'll see what Florida State does with it. Is that how often will Sweat and Burns play together? You know, will they put Burns at one spot on the other spot and let Josh continue playing buck, or will they Sweat to the other spot and let Burns play buck and see what happens? It'll be interesting to see if they play together a lot, or if that will be the main starting lineup with the 2 defensive tackles, of course, being Nadi and Christmas. You know, Will they play them at all together? Will they like to, confuse the offense? Will they, keep Burns or Sweat out depending on who's in and put another guy in so that they can kind of keep them fresh and let them attack, in waves rather than at the same time? It'd be interesting. They have options to do whatever they want to do there, depending on how comfortable they are with, Burns and Sweat's run defense. That's something also have to consider. When you have guys like this who are 6'5", 218 pounds, like Burns, who are a little bit thinner, you question how well do they hold up against a run. That is something that will be very interesting to note, which could determine whether or not they play Burns more often and as a starting role every down defensive end. Also, a question they have to answer is how much will Jacob Pugh play as a rusher? Will they just kind of let him hang back and play more linebacker now that they have more bodies and, of course, the depth at defensive end? Or will they still bring him down there just to let him get some reps because he's so good at it? We'll see. Will he be needed? That's the question that kind of comes to mind. So Florida State has a lot of interesting things going on at the defensive line for this 2017 season. Uh, I'm excited for them. I'm not even a fan of Florida State. I'm an Alabama fan, but seeing the Florida State defensive line, I'm interested to see how they produce or will they produce against Alabama. Also, who's going to be the starters? How much will they play? Who's going to do what? So, well, I mean, we know the starters, but you know what I'm trying to say, like who's going to play how much. So, thank you for paying attention to this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'll probably look more into this as the game gets closer, but I'm really excited about trench play for this first game of the season. Thank you for paying attention. Florida State fans, let me know what you think about your defensive line situation. Who do you think will be the most impactful player? How much do you think these true freshmen will get into the game? And what do you think about that starting defensive line rotation? Who do you think will start and who do you think is going to come in and out? However you think about it, just put it in the comments and let me know. Alabama fans, what do you think about Florida State's defensive line situation? Interesting here. How would you compare Florida State's defensive line to Alabama's defensive line situation? We don't know as much about our defensive line, so this is going to be interesting to see. So let me know what you think. Until then, see you for the next video. Thanks for watching.